During the sci-fi boom of the mid-1950s, MGM Studios set out to create one of the boldest and most spectacular sci-fi films ever made. Endeavoring to do for science fiction what The Wizard of Oz had done for fantasy, MGM approached the idea with the kind of serious commitment the studio was well known for. Working off a script titled Forbidden Planet, written by Cyril Hume, itself based on a spec screenplay written by Irving Bloch and Alan Adler that was called Fatal Planet, MGM assigned the project a significant budget of just under $2 million and hired Fred Wilcox to direct.
"20 years ago, in the far reaches of outer space, the exploration vessel the Bellerophon went missing in the vicinity of Altair 4. Commander John J. Adams and his crew of the United Planets cruiser C-57D have been sent to investigate, and as they approach the seemingly desolate planet, they hear the voice of the Bellerophon's apparent sole survivor, Dr. Morbius, who urges them to turn back and never return. Commander Adams, unwilling to leave without accomplishing his mission, lands the C-57D on the planet's surface and is met by Dr. Morbius's faithful servant, Robbie the Robot, a technological marvel unlike anything anyone has ever seen before. Robbie takes the commander and two of his lieutenants to see Dr. Morbius, who tells them a vague story of how the crew of the Bellerophon perished one by one, leaving the Doctor alone with his daughter, Altera. Morbius tells them to leave at once to avoid falling victim to the same unknown force that killed every last one of his crewmates. But Commander Adams, knowing there must be more to the story, decides to stay and contact his superiors for further instructions. That night, something unseen breaks into the C-57D and sabotages its instruments. When Commander Adams returns to Morbius to learn more, he discovers the secret of Altair 4, that the planet is, in fact, the ruin of an ancient alien race of super beings who disappeared after nearly unlocking the greatest scientific secrets of the universe. Morbius, who has been studying the technology of this race, called the Krell, is unwilling to share his findings with the rest of humanity, but the crew of the C-57D has bigger problems when an invisible monster that defies all known laws of evolution and rationality attacks their ship and begins killing them, just as it killed the doomed crew of the Bellerophon.
For the cast, they hired Leslie Nielsen in the lead role of Commander Adams. Nielsen was just starting out at the time and had worked almost exclusively in television, and though Forbidden Planet would prove to be the breakout hit that launched his stardom, it would be 2 decades before he'd become well known as a comedic actor. At the time, he was seen as a handsome leading man with an excellent voice, and his roles, including that of Commander Adams, were built around trying to capitalize on that in dramatic films and romantic comedies like Ransom, Tammy and the Bachelor, and later, The Poseidon Adventure. For the female lead, they cast the gorgeous Anne Francis, a capable actress in her mid-20s known for supporting roles in Susan Slept Here and Bad Day at Blackrock, alongside her leading role in Blackboard Jungle. Aside from Forbidden Planet, which would become her most famous film credit, she, like Nielsen, would find more success in television in the years that followed, becoming a regular fixture on the small screen throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s. For the most important role, that of the tragic antagonist Dr. Morbius, the studio wanted a much bigger name, so they hired the multiple Academy Award nominee and Broadway superstar Walter Pidgeon, a venerated actor with nearly 100 film credits to his name, including The Dark Command, How Green Was My Valley, and The Bad and the Beautiful. Pidgeon was practically a household name at the time, and after Forbidden Planet, he would continue to be successful in film, theater, and television until his retirement in 1977. But not even Walter Pidgeon was the biggest and most expensive star of the film. That honor belongs to Robbie the Robot, a $125,000 mechanical suit full of moving parts and intricate design work that would become so famous, Robbie would take on an acting life of his own, appearing in other films like The Invisible Boy, and guest starring in television shows like The Twilight Zone and The Thin Man, along with countless additional cameos in film and TV that continue to this day. Designed by legendary production designer and effects artist Robert Kinoshita, who also designed the B-9 environmental control robot from Lost in Space that is sometimes confused with Robbie, The robot became a cultural phenomenon in his own right, even inspiring real-life advancements in robotics, not to mention the thousands of kids who would grow up to work in the field. Robbie stands proudly beside other famous sci-fi automatons like the Maschinenmensch, Gort, and R2-D2, and he is still a regular fixture at sci-fi conventions around the globe.
That is correct, sir.
The MGM effects team spared no expense in realizing their vision, so much so they earned an Academy Award nomination, but one thing they weren't equipped to handle was the need for animation, especially as it related to the id monster that menaces the crew of the C-57D late in the film. For this and a few other brief shots, they brought in one of Walt Disney Studios' premier animators, Joshua Mador. Mador put together the animated effects for the thrilling attack sequence by using detailed black and white sketches composited in negative, not through the more typical cell animation. Another experimental aspect to the film is its score, one of the most original film scores in Hollywood history. Created by Louis and Bebe Barron using homemade oscillators and other tinkered-with electronic equipment, it stands as the very first electronic score from a time in which there were fewer than a dozen people creating electronic music. Unfortunately, due to union rules at the time, the duo weren't allowed to be credited as musicians, and were thus ineligible for any major awards for their efforts. While we're stopped, I just want to quickly remind you to hit that like button, and if you really do like this video, hit that subscribe as well. Your support really makes this channel possible, so please, if you like what I'm doing and you want to see more, consider joining my Patreon to get access to bonus content, vote on future topics, and more. If you want to see even more from me, I'm also the co-host of a couple of different podcasts, the Streaming HEAP and From Here to Paternity, which are available wherever you get your podcasts, and I have a novel called Paradox that is available through Amazon. If all else fails, though, you can always check out my website at emcgill.com, where you'll find written reviews of plenty more sci-fi classics in both film and literature. Now then, with all that shameless self-promotion out of the way, let's move on. When it released in 1956, Forbidden Planet wasn't an enormous box office success, only taking in about $2.8 million, enough to cover the production and marketing budgets, but only earning about $200,000 in total profit. That's not bad for an average film of the era, but it didn't come anywhere close to MGM's expectations for a tentpole event film. Still, thanks to positive reviews, good word of mouth, and of course Robbie, the film had massive staying power, and became a sleeper hit that pulled in plenty of money in re-releases, including one kiddie matinee release that was trimmed to be more family-friendly. However, the legacy of Forbidden Planet goes beyond its financial earnings. It is a landmark science fiction film that should be required viewing for anybody interested in the so-called golden age of sci-fi cinema. I respect the different opinions of my viewers enough to not say this is the greatest science fiction film of that era, but if you want to make that case in the comments, I certainly won't argue with you. It's a sci-fi spectacle that is both effortlessly enjoyable and intellectually provocative. Several young filmmakers were heavily inspired, not just by Robbie, but by everything about the film, including Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, Joe Dante, John Carpenter, and many more. There's a pretty impressive collection of interviews on the film's most recent Blu-ray release. One man whose inspiration is particularly obvious is Gene Roddenberry, whose own Star Trek was undeniably influenced by the film. From the look of the transporters, the idea of a military-style crew exploring alien worlds and answering to a higher authority of united planets, the heady sci-fi themes and ideas, the miniskirts and mad scientists, replicators, blasters, a horn dog captain, and all that technobabble, it all feels very familiar. Perhaps the biggest and most subtle clue is the numerical designation of the Enterprise, which can be found in one of Forbidden Planet's opening lines of dialogue.
Ship on course, sir. We'll reach DC Point at 1701.
Roddenberry has been quoted denying these connections, but several Roddenberry biographers have turned up various letters, memos, and Star Trek production notes that make it abundantly clear that the creators of the TV show paid special attention to Forbidden Planet and used it as a partial template for the show's aesthetic. Heck, just look at the shape of these alien doorways from the pilot episode, and compare them to these doors from Forbidden Planet. The doors are an example of one of my favorite aspects of the film, its way of describing the Krell through inference. You never get to see the Krell in the flesh because they've been extinct for hundreds of thousands of years, but you get a hazy idea of what they must look like by the shape of their doorways, the odd handles on their door mechanisms, and the shape of their mind-training headpiece. I don't know if anyone's coined the term alien ergonomics before, but it reminds me of some of the best science fiction out there, such as Arthur C. Clarke's Rendezvous with Rama. As for the narrative, it maintains a delicate balance between popularizing science and offering dire warnings about its dangerous potential. Like The Thing from Another World, this is a film skeptical of scientific hubris, as clearly represented by both Dr. Morbius and the extinct Krell, and interested in painting military leadership in a positive light. This reflects the times in which it was written, where children were routinely going through duck and cover drills over fears of an inevitable nuclear war, and the story isn't shy about arguing that science, when it ignores human nature, can lead to disaster. It also takes some loose inspiration from William Shakespeare's The Tempest, with Dr. Morbius standing in as a sci-fi version of the great magician Prospero. There are plenty of similarities, but it's not a true analog, with the two works diverging in many important ways, not least of which being their thematic goals and primary mediums. However, like most of Shakespeare's work, Forbidden Planet attempts to bridge the gap between genre entertainment and high-minded art, and that's no small task. In the late 2000s, efforts were underway to remake Forbidden Planet, with James Cameron, David Twohy, and J. Michael Straczynski all involved at one point or another. There have also been rumors of a more recent attempt to get a remake off the ground, but honestly, this is one film that would be poorly served by a modern update. I'm usually more open to remakes than most, but even I think a new Forbidden Planet should be avoided like the plague. It's because it's a masterpiece of Americana that belongs in its time, and there is little, if any, room for improvement. And that's all for today, my fellow Earthlings. What's your favorite classic sci-fi robot? Let me know in the comments, and while you're there, don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you in advance, and until next time, this is the Unapologetic Geek, telling you to never be ashamed of what you love, as long as you're not hurting anybody.
I've beamed and beamed.
Sorry, miss. I was giving myself an oil job.